Welcome to Riverstone Reviews. This is a pilot review, so sit back and enjoy the maiden voyage as we travel in time to the world of Timecrimes, a Spanish film from 2007 put out by Six Shooter Film Series and Magnet, written and directed by Nacho Vigalondo. I hope I said that right. It is a foreign language film and it is subtitled, not dubbed. However, the movie contains minimal dialogue, making the subtitles of little inconvenience. The film premise is that an everyday Hector, through a series of seemingly unrelated events, finds himself inside multiple time loops where versions of himself attempt to correct the mistakes when he goes back in time. The basic theme is time travel causes more problems than it solves, and that scientists like sending untrained, unauthorized strangers repeatedly back in time. For those of you who are watching this review to decide whether this film is worth a watch, my rating will be at the end of this video. Please know this review will contain spoilers. I repeat, it will contain spoilers. So if you want to skip over the spoilers to my conclusion of whether this film is worth viewing, skip ahead to the time listed below. So let's get through this together. Strap on your tinfoil hat and synchronize your clocks as we travel through the next moment in time together, figuring out whether this movie is recognized as a compelling suspense drama or a crime against sci-fi time travel films. Our film begins in a peaceful rural valley where our middle-aged Hector and his wife repair their fix-it-up country home. And of course, Hector has a pair of binoculars at the ready to spy on neighbors. Using them, Hector sees in the woods an attractive young girl who is taking off her clothes. When his wife leaves for the store, Hector decides it is a good idea and not creepy at all to go off into the woods to find this naked girl. When he finds her, she is naked and unconscious. So, doing what any mature man who wanders into the woods in pursuit of a naked girl would do, he tosses sticks and pokes at her like the carcass of a dead raccoon. Suddenly, someone appears behind Hector and stabs him in the arm. Fearing for his life, Hector runs, abandoning the naked girl and forgetting she exists. Hector stops and sees he is being pursued by a pink, bandage-masked man. Frightened, Hector runs uphill to a locked building compound. Hector smashes open a window and enters a building. He finds a first aid kit and uses it to wrap bandage around his stabbed arm, then comes across a walkie-talkie. He talks into it, trying to reach someone for help. A male voice responds. Hector explains a pink bandage-masked man is trying to kill him. A voice on the walkie-talkie says he sees the man approaching the building that Hector is in, and Hector must flee to a round building up the hill. That is where Hector can hide from the pink bandage-masked man pursuing him. Doing what he is told, Hector runs to the building where he meets a male voice, the scientist. Greeting Hector with the emotional urgency of someone accepting a piece of delivery, the scientist instructs Hector to get into a large steel vat with hydraulic sealing lid that seems to have no ventilation or air holes, explaining that inside there is the only place that the pink bandage-masked man will not look, because scientists understand how pink bandage-masked men think. Hector accepts this senseless explanation and climbs into the vat. The scientist then seals the lid and submerges Hector in a white fluid. While Hector struggles not to drown, there's a flash of light and the lid opens. Confused and physically overwhelmed, Hector crawls out of the machine. The scientist watches Hector, but acts as if he has no clue who Hector is or where he came from. Going outside, Hector looks to his home in the distant valley through his binoculars that he has been carrying this whole time and sees himself at home with his wife. Confused, Hector says he must return to his home, for there is a stranger there who looks like him. The scientist explains to Hector that he can't, because a Hector is already at home. And if Hector came out of the time machine, he must have gone back in time and created a duplicate of himself. What he, Hector 2, must do is hide and stay out of the way until after Hector 1, the original Hector version of himself, comes up the complex and goes back in time. Then Hector 2 can go home and resume his life knowing there is only one Hector again. When the scientist leaves to prepare the time machine for Hector 1's arrival, Hector 2 becomes unnerved, having trouble believing this is all real, and steals the scientist's car to drive home to his wife and Hector 1. On the way, driving down the hill, he drives past the pretty girl he saw naked in the woods, but she is now bicycling up the road. He stops his car, and when Hector 2 does, his car is suddenly struck from behind by a van, causing his vehicle to be pushed off the road over a hill into a tree. And because airbags don't exist in this movie, the impact causes him to smash his face against the steering wheel. Hector 2 sits dazed while blood flows from a fresh head wound. To fix his head wound, Hector 2 decides it's a good idea to expose the arm-infected stab wound and use the dirty bandage to wrap his head. Pink fizz, a mix of blood and the white time travel fluid, oozes out of the arm wound and stains the yards of bandage completely and evenly pink. As he wraps the pink bandage around his head, he sees himself in the mirror and realizes it looks like the same pink bandage worn by the man who chased and stabbed him. This causes him to wrap his head entirely like a mummy. Strangely, the bandage that once wrapped around his arm is long enough to wrap around his head half dozen times, and since I don't have a medical degree, I cannot refute that the best way to cover a forehead wound is make sure you bandage your nose and mouth too. While his face is bandaged like a mask, the girl on the bicycle comes to his window and asks him if he needs help. Hector realizes he is in fact the pink bandage masked man. Instead of doing nothing which would prevent him from going back in time, thus fixing everything, he decides the best course of action is to reenact the complicated course of events that drew Hector 1 into the woods and up to the time machine. And the first thing he must do is get this girl into the wooded hillside and naked, because doing anything less creepy would not move the plot forward. By force, Hector takes the girl to the location, tells her he means her no harm, and commands her to bite her thumb and get naked. Apparently, forcing a woman to get naked is not considered harming her. While Hector 2 is distracted, the naked girl tries to escape. Hector 2 chases the girl, tackling her and knocking her out. After carrying her back, taking off her panties, and posing her, Hector 2 hides. Hector 1 finally shows up and Hector 2 jumps out to stab Hector 1 the same way he was stabbed. Hector 1 flees to the science complex as expected, and Hector 2 chases after to be sure. Then Hector 2 hears a scream and runs back to discover the naked girl is gone. Realizing she may be going for help, he searches and sees in the distance that the girl escaped to his house in the valley below. Pursuing her, Hector 2 enters his house, calling out to the girl that she should not call anyone for help, and he promises not to hurt her, just as he promised before forcing her to get naked and knocking her out. Hearing her upstairs, Hector 2 rushes up to find an open window. He climbs out the window and spots feet hanging over the edge of the roof above. Doing her no harm, Hector jumps up and grabs her by the ankles to yank her off the roof. When he does, she falls 2 stories to the ground below, dying on impact. Looking over the edge, Hector realizes that the body laying face down has the same jacket and hairstyle of his wife, and thinks he accidentally killed his wife while pursuing the girl. Then, Hector 2 hears over the walkie-talkie the scientist talking with Hector 1. When Hector 1 gets off the line, Hector 2 speaks to the scientist and says he is the man in the pink bandage mask. He then instructs the scientist to get Hector 1 to the time machine and that he will arrive shortly in a car. Rushing outside, he jumps into his wife's car instead of his own vehicle and drives back to the science complex. Hector 2 arrives and waits until Hector 1 is sent back in time. The scientist then comes out the building to meet with Hector 2, relieved the time loop has been ended. Hector 2 yells he must go back in time again for something went wrong. The scientist tries to convince Hector 2 that the machine won't work and all the power has been used up, but Hector 2 calls the scientist a liar and strikes him in the shoulder with a crowbar. The scientist confesses Hector 2 already went back in time, and Hector 3 exists, showed up, and instructed the scientist not to let Hector 2 into the time machine at any cost. The scientist says Hector 3 was unable to fix the problems that Hector 2 wants to go back in time and fix. But Hector 2 says he has no choice. He must go back in time and try. So, the scientist sends Hector 2 back in time. Arriving in the past that same day, Hector 3 climbs out of the time machine. The scientist again has no idea what's going on. Hector 3 rambles off instructions to the scientist, hushing any questions and slapping him to keep his attention. He explains that Hector 2 will be exiting the machine in a minute, that the scientist must distract Hector 2, giving Hector 3 time to get to his house before Hector 2. Instead of stealing the car Hector 2 will steal, which would completely delay Hector 2, Hector 3 searches for another vehicle and takes one of the compound's vans. However, driving off the compound, Hector 3 discovers that Hector 2 is ahead of him driving the car he stole. Hector 3 stops and pulls off the road near where Hector 2 stopped his car before the bicycling girl passed. Hector 3 waits for the girl on a bicycle to pass Hector 2, and then accelerates the van, rams into the back of the car, sending him over the hill. But the impact causes Hector 3 to lose control of the van, swerving wildly until the van rushes off the road and crashes. Waking from being unconscious, he spots the girl in the wood hiding from Hector 2 after he made her get naked and knocked her unconscious. Realizing he's too late to stop Hector 1 from entering the woods, or stop Hector 2 from chasing the girl, Hector 3 uses the walkie-talkie to call the scientist and tell him that Hector 3 has failed to fix the problem caused by Hector 2, and that the scientist is to not let Hector 2 go back in time no matter what. Hector 3 approaches the girl hiding in the woods. Though frightened by his appearance, Hector 3 calms her down, explaining that he too is being chased by the man with the pink bandage mask as well. He tells her that he knows who the masked man is, and that they are safe where they are. Of course, she doesn't ask who the masked man is, or question that the very injured Hector 3 is in no condition to be of any help to her, or question the logic of this stranger who is telling her it is safe to remain in the vicinity of the masked man who is searching for her. She helps the injured Hector 3 to a house nearby, Hector's house. They enter, but for some reason Hector never divulges this is his home. The girl leaves him in a room to go search the house. Hector's wife then walks into the room and finds Hector 3 there. Startled by his injuries, Hector's wife tells him she's scared because there's a pink masked man in the yard and someone inside the house. Hector 3 knows the time is near when Hector 2 will kill his wife. Hector 3 sneaks his wife outside and has her hide into a shed. Then Hector 3 goes back into the house where the girl hides from Hector 2. Hector 3 convinces the girl to let him cut her hair, put on his wife's coat, and then tells her to go hide on the roof. And following the screenplay's canon that characters will unwaveringly trust complete strangers' instructions when their lives are in danger, the girl does exactly what Hector 3 tells her to do. Hector 3 then sneaks out of the house, gets his wife from the shed, and takes her to 2 chairs out in the yard at a far side of the property, and sits with her staring up at the stars while Hector 2 kills the girl. This is the over-detailed intermeshed events that is the story of Timecrimes. You may wonder why I gave such a detailed breakdown, but it is necessary to understand where this film succeeds and fails. Let me talk about some of the areas where the film succeeds, and there are a few things that really worked out well. First is the ability to pull off a science fiction project with such a low budget and no special effects. I can't give the production enough credit for this. Despite the lack of effects and budget, I never once thought that there should be more effects or that something was missing. I would even go further to say its low-budget nature actually enhanced its believability, giving it the sense that it could happen in the world we live in or be taking place around us without knowing. Which gets to my second success of the film. The leading actor playing all versions of Hector, Cara Elijad, and I hope I said that right. He was able to do the difficult task of creating a character that was identifiably different each time loop. Yet subtle, undeniable changes gave us Hector 1, who was dismissive, reactionary, and insular. Hector 2 was confused, frantic, but motivated. And Hector 3 was confident, decisive, and yet had an air of resignation. This actor understood that he needed to create 3 different versions of Hector for the audience to believe there are 3 different versions of Hector. To give the director and writer credit, they created a clean narrative and went to great lengths to tie off all loose ends and create a well-constructed film. My criticisms of the film, which I will begin here, rise from the fact that in the director and writer's efforts to tie off all loose ends and make a seamless film, they became compelled to create moments that seemed unemotionally counterintuitive, or brush over the ramifications and impact of a moment, all to show an audience that an action one version of Hector does directly connects to something happening to another version of Hector. One of many examples is the moment when Hector 2 is forcing the girl in the woods to get naked so that Hector 1 will see her. The director of this movie tries to make Hector 2's actions more relatable by making Hector 2 more concerned about whether Hector 1 is watching the girl undress with binoculars, while showing Hector 2 isn't interested in a naked girl at all. But that doesn't reflect Hector's earlier actions of going into the woods to find a naked girl. This could have been a huge dramatic moment of insight where Hector explores the idea that he's forcing the girl to get naked to replicate events, but part of him should either be enjoying or completely repulsed by violating this girl. Being close to her and in control of her getting naked should have released or exposed the darker side of Hector's nature, seizing on an opportunity that would not have existed if he didn't travel time. This movie had the chance to explore how scientific discovery changes us on the inside, for better or worse. But the director and writer decided to make Hector 2 seem like a good man trying to reconstruct events, and that bad things happen only because he is trying to do the right thing. Thus, he willingly violates this girl without a thought or emotional response, and with only good intentions, saying he won't hurt her. At the same time, he's forcing her to get naked, and this makes him seem unemotional and callous. And simultaneously, having him worried about luring Hector 1 makes him seem completely selfish. And this is one of the places where the film fails as a time travel. Time travel loops show reoccurring events, so each time a character goes through a loop, they should either evolve into a better person or devolve into a worse person, which is the audience's reason for watching. But if the character neither evolves or devolves, and his only motivation is to reenact events so that other events can happen, then the audience will realize there's no reason to get emotionally invested because emotions are irrelevant to the story. Thus, forcing the innocent girl to get naked isn't treated as a crime but a plot point. The movie's titled Timecrimes, yet crimes committed aren't actually given any weight. They're not given a moment to understand those affected by these crimes. I wanted to empathize with these victims, or find insight into Hector's mind, dark as it may be. To discover it is happening for plot, so time travel occurs, is not satisfying. And this problem is further underscored by the fact that the writer never fleshes out any of the female characters. In this review, I refer to them as naked girl and wife, not out of insult or being dismissive, but by the fact that is the extent of depth and character development they are given in the film. The girl is violated in the woods, knocked out, and then later set up by Hector to be killed instead of his wife. And his wife is killed and then saved. These are big moments and would have been incredibly impactful if we were allowed to feel or identify with these women as people with actual lives, wants and needs. I would have been torn about which one should die, or even hoped that Hector would try to kill himself to save both their lives. But the women are treated as objects by the character and the film, so you don't care if the girl is killed or the wife is saved because the film doesn't care, which in the end makes me not care about Hector. My next criticism comes from the concept of time travel. A writer must know which comes first, the chicken or the egg. And what I mean by that is, before a character goes back in time, there has to exist a timeline where time travel has not yet happened, and another one where time travel has occurred. This is the only way for an audience to know how time travel has changed things, so we know what time travel has changed and whether that change is good or bad. It also helps people know what direction the future should take. Timecrimes ignores all that. It creates such a tight, integrated, intermeshed story of how future versions of himself affect his past versions. It quickly becomes clear that the story could have never happened because the only reason he gets in the time machine in the first place is that a version of him goes back in time to tell the scientists to prepare the time machine while he chases the present version of himself into the time machine. But that can't happen if he never gets in the time machine in the first place without being chased by himself. And because the writer never wrote a way into the story, there is no way out of the story. Therefore, Hector can't make any changes and must hit every plot point written without fail, regardless of logic, because if he doesn't, then none of this story ever happens. It's a story written in a circle that has no beginning and end and lacks character development because the characters have no influence on the events. And because of this, we already know everything he's going to do, because he has already done it, because he's the one who caused himself to go back in time in the first place. So by the time we are introduced to Hector 3, all the suspense is out of the movie because we've seen the outcome. And that leads me to my final criticism, the final plot twist. Hector 3 setting up the girl to be killed in place of his wife. When that moment happens, I felt manipulated, because when I learned that Earlier in the movie, all it took to make Hector think this girl was his wife was a 10-second haircut and putting on a coat. It becomes clear the whole event was set up to fool an audience and to give a fake motivation that Hector is going back in time to save his wife. And this is a prime moment where the actions of the script don't match logic or emotions. Anyone who has been married would think it's strange that Hector never went to his wife's body after she fell off the roof to see if there was anything he could do to save her life. And when he did, he would have found out it was the girl. But is killing the girl any less remorseful? Pulling the girl off the roof and killing her should still cause Hector to feel enough guilt to want to go back in time and fix it. So disguising her as his wife was not only unnecessary and manipulative to fool an audience, the movie has Hector behave in an unauthentic way in order to keep the character from running to the injured woman, be it his wife or the girl. It is where executing a clever idea undermines emotional truth. So that's it. We've gone through my critique of good and bad. Let's wrap this up. Giving this film a grade, I have to say it is a C+. It is better than average. If you don't look into it too deeply, there is enough here worth viewing. I think you'll enjoy the lead actor portrays himself as both the antagonist and protagonist, that the film is fluid, well constructed, and does a good job of creating a dramatic suspense mystery through the first half of the film. The leading actor puts in a performance worth watching. And if you're a science fiction buff, you will be able to appreciate the quality of the film despite the low budget. But the things that hurt its score were lack of character development, unemotional plot driven by decisions, and sacrificing logic for clever storytelling. Time travel is nothing more than a dramatic device to create mystery here. Suspense disappears after the second time loop, and the climax turns out to be nothing more than a plot twist. Is it a good suspense? It does enough right to keep you engaged. Is it good science fiction? No. Asking the question, why is this story happening? The answer is because time travel, and that's as deep as the answer goes. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this review. Thank you for listening. Agree or disagree? Leave your comments below. Punch like, subscribe if you wish. There will be many more reviews coming. And remember, in the river of life, don't let yourself get pushed around by the currents. Be yourself. Be a stone in the river.